Good morning, Hackcraft here. Today we're going to be installing Mountain Pass Model 3 front lower control arm spherical bearing so we can get some road feel through the steering wheel. These are spherical bearing bushings to replace the stock ones. They include sleeves that will help guide the bolts, and we'll go through the steps here. First step, of course, is jack up your car, which I've already done. One thing I can say, the car is lower than I thought it would be, and the standard quick jack is not wide enough to hit both jack points, so I actually had to use an extension that I had. It came from Quick Jack makes it. It makes it just a little bit wider so you can pick up cars with wider jack points. B, the car itself is so low that with everything on there and the special jack pucks, you can't get the quick jack underneath the car. So you do need these some type of ramps or wood or something that you drive onto to create enough clearance that you can jack the car up. So we're going to take that wheel off, and I'll shove the camera underneath the car and show you what we got down there and what we're going to replace, what it looks like now, and we'll just start going through the steps one at a time. Thanks. Okay, so the wheel comes off with a 21mm socket. Here you go. Just impact wrench on the nuts. Wheel comes right off. Nice and easy. There's no spigot that gets all hung up. There's clearance here. Real easy, real nice. So I'm thankful for that. While you're down here, and inspect your brakes. Looks like I got plenty of pad. And since I never use these rotors with the one pedal driving, it looks like these things are brand new. So that's kind of cool. That's pretty funny. So yeah, basically no wear on the brakes whatsoever. Very little dust. All right, now while we're here, so you can see the lower control arm, the bushing that we're going to be getting at is way in the back here. Now you can see it. So a couple things. I guess those bolts tend to back out, although mine on this side of the car, the passenger side, appear to be in place, which is a good thing. But they're known to back out. Frame isn't known to be welded very accurately, put it that way. So the alignment's a little bit goofy, and it puts a lot of strain on the bolts themselves laterally, which you'd like to avoid. So the kit comes with some sleeves, which you'll see in a minute, that helps take up some of that lateral load on the bolts, and just has them placing a clamping load to hold the control arm in place. So that's the bushing we're going for. So obviously we need to disconnect that connection to the frame, to the subframe. Bottom of the shock's going to have to come off. And then I can't see it, but there's a ball joint back here that we're going to have to break. Bottom of that, the ball joint has got to be broken as well. So those are the three things. Not a whole lot to disconnect. I think the instructions mentioned something about taking the sway bar tie rod off, which is right here. And I guess we can do that as well. That looks pretty straightforward. That shouldn't affect alignment. The bushing may affect alignment. We'll have to see. Toe adjustments right here, pretty accessible. Toe is pretty easy to do yourself. And then you've got this bump steer bushing back here, which looks pretty cruddy. It's pretty compliant. I mean, it's not bad, but you can see some wear on it. And that's a stone in the middle. There's a point where it's got some openings to give it some compliance. So it's probably softer than I'd like. That may be the next thing that I replace, but we'll start here with the lower control arm bushing and see how it goes. Okay, the first step is to remove this bottom tray. I'm assuming you can see that. Sorry, there's only so far away I can get without being underground. This is held on with 10mm bolts and a couple 15mm nuts according to the instructions. So I've got those tools set up. I'm going to start pulling those out, and we'll take that down. I'll show you what that looks like afterwards. And then just before anyone brings it up, I consider it a matter of preference. I've got the car up on quick jacks, but even though they're on quick jacks, I always like something there in case something goes wrong. So I do put jack stands underneath the car as well. So one on either side. Pick something relatively solid. Once this cover is off, I can find something better to put them under. I just don't like getting under the car without some sort of belts and suspenders, something else that can help catch the car if something goes terribly wrong. Alright, you can start to get a better look underneath the car now. We'll take a look. There's the entire lower control arm. And the first thing we're going to do is mark the front with an F and the rear with an R, because apparently it has some something to do with how the bushing actually goes in and which side you press from. So there's some somewhat important. So we'll make sure we take care of that. And yeah, I mean, if you're curious to see what's underneath the battery tray, a whole bunch of rocks came falling down. But aside from the pile of rocks, kind of empty down there. Just motor and transmission, and a whole lot of open space. So should be pretty nice to work on. Keynote: orange wires. We're going to stay very clear of those. Orange wires is high voltage, and this is a battery, so they're most definitely live. Away from, but where we're working, no orange wires. Where we're not working, orange wires. Okay, so the first step, according to the directions, which I believe is right, we need to take the sway bar link away from the damper. We've got to remove that, and that's achieved by holding the Torx screw with a Torx bit. It's actually easy enough. I'm just holding this by hand. I had to use a little bit of force to get this to break free, and then you've got an 18mm wrench on the nut, which we're loosening up. That'll make this end bar sway bar link come loose. After that, we're going to take out the 2 bolts on the bottom holding the lower control arm to the subframe. Then we do the bolt holding the control arm to the damper, and then finally we take off the nut that connects the end of the ball joint here. I'm assuming everything should kind of stay put. There's enough other stuff there. I don't expect anything to spring or move crazy on me, but we'll find out. All right, we'll keep going here. I'd like to do more like action stuff, but I've got one hand on the camera and one hand on the wrench doesn't exactly work. So bear with me. I'll try and catch as much as I can. I'll show you as I go, and if I can recruit my daughter here later on, I'll try to have her help me. All right, so we've got the subframe bolts, 2 of those removed. If I can actually show that very well, I don't know that I can. 2 subframe bolts are removed. I think I'm seeing that. And the damper bolt and nut were also removed. So now we're just down to the ball joint on the end. These were 21mm sockets for all of those fasteners. This is not a 21. I'm guessing it's a 22. I'm going to dig around my bag and see, but slightly larger nut on the bottom here. So I got both of the lower control arms out. It wasn't too terribly difficult, kind of a good news, bad news sort of thing. I did have to use an impact gun to initially break this nut free. It's got one of these sliding locking washers. I forget what these are called, Nord locks or something. I think they're Nord locks. Really good locking washers, very expensive, so it's interesting to see that that Tesla used those. Not bad. I'm probably going to put some thread locker on there when I'm done. But that's that. I didn't have fixed wrench open-ender box that's 22mm. So I had to use an adjustable wrench, and on the inside, actually you can see there, same Torx pattern as the other tie rod for the sway arm. The good news part was I did not need to use a ball joint separator. Wasn't sure how this was going to be put together. It's just a cone. It just sets in there. So that was really nice. I was dreading, I don't know, I just hate doing ball joint separation because it always sounds so dramatic when they pop. The instructions do say put the nuts back on because these cones can come off, and if you lose them you're kind of out of luck. So nuts are back on, just tight enough that they're not going anywhere. We'll start pressing next. I'm going to try and get someone to help me because I can't do that with one hand, and I think that might be worthwhile seeing. The rest of this is pretty straightforward. So far so good on the car. On the quick jacks, I do want to work kind of quickly, but I'll go through the key points. I marked front and rear, passenger and driver. Whoops, that would be front driver. So F, D, R, oops, there we go. So front driver's side, rear driver's side, rear passenger, front passenger. Apparently that's critical when you're pressing in the bushing. So that's the next step. We'll see you down there. Thanks. First thing we're going to do is mark the position of the bushing that's already in there. So I'm just going to draw a couple lines to show where it is. And then looking at this end, you know which end's up because this sits in like this. So that ends up, which is important because the bushings that come with the kit have a an area milled out on one side for the sleeves. So one side is flat, one side has a pocket for the sleeve to fit into, which means that this needs to go in. So it's a rear side, just like this actually. So we've got the larger cylinder on the bottom, then we've got our control arm, and then the smaller cylinder is resting on the bushing. Hopefully it should go through, and then the ram is pushing onto a plate on top. There's a plate on the bottom. Looks all pretty straightforward. Let's see if it is. There we go. It's crying. Squishing my feet. We've got control arm sans bushing. And that's the stock bushing. So full of rubber, extremely lightweight. Feels fairly compliant. You can see I'm able to move the rubber around, at least the flashing of it. So this is what we're getting rid of. All right, there's two sides of the new bushings. There's a thin aluminum end, you can see here, with a metal washer dust shield on the top. And then the other side is a thicker piece of anodized aluminum here. And what they're saying is basically the thick end of the anodized shell is the end that should be against the arm. So this is a side that will go against the arm like this. The thin side is the side should be against the press tool. So the press tool will go on the thin side like this. The tool's actually pressing on this metal ring, so it's not, if you can run I can run my finger over it, that metal ring is actually higher than the aluminum housing. So we're actually pressing on the metal ring. And then the new bearing are pressed in the lower control arm, with the bearing being pressed into the rear of the lower control arm. So this is the rear, this is rear driver side. So it's in the rear. And you're supposed to press it until the thick side is flush over here. So you're gonna see, running out of hands, but this will go flush with this surface here. Okay. So again, we're pressing from the rear side. We're lining up the lines, and then that point needs to go up as shown. Yeah, it definitely wants to go in a little crooked when you start out, but we'll bear with that. And Alright, so everything is just loosely assembled right now. Nothing's tight. Just wanted to see how everything fits. So there's the new spherical roller bearing installed in place. I did snug up those bolts. I did not put thread locker on them yet. This still fits up here, so the linkage to the sway bar still fits. And everything else goes together pretty easy. So at this point, assembly's not too bad. Yeah, just keep going. So what I'm going to do is actually take the bolts out of the roller bearing one at a time, put thread locker on them, and then torque them to 100 foot-pounds. At this point, things are looking pretty decent. Alright, so everything's back together, and from the outside, you really can't tell a difference. Just went for a test drive. The verdict on the bushings is, yeah, definitely more direct steering feel, definitely more road feel. Is it the same as driving a Porsche? No, you don't get the same sort of telepathic feeling through the steering wheel, but I'm actually getting some road feel, which in my opinion before this car had zero road feel. It's a huge improvement. Definitely worth the $400 or whatever it is for the bushings and a few hours of labor. All told, it took me about 4 hours to do this, and that included filming, which obviously slows me down. So Yeah, hey, I'd say if you have a Model 3 Performance and you're frustrated with the road feel, great mod, Mountain Pass Performance, shipped immediately and got me the parts in just a few days, so no complaints there. I did leave off most of the assembly. I think I tried to point out the major items. The only thing that's noteworthy on the assembly side is when you're when you're bolting the damper to the lower control arm, you want to actually get a jack underneath under the lower control arm and compress the suspension as much as you can, so that when it does get torqued down, you're not going to torque it in a position that it twists once it sits on the sits at its actual ride height. If you'd like to see more, let me know. If you'd like to see less, let me know that too. If there's some sort of anything you want to know about the car, or any sort of modifications you think I should do next, again, shoot me a comment, and I'm happy to try and see if it's something I can do. Like and subscribe. Thanks. Bye.